My name is Natalie Bennett. I'm a 29-year-old illustrator living in Brooklyn, and 5 years ago today, I thought I was living my dream. A quiet morning, a husband who remembered anniversaries, and a baby, or so I thought, growing inside me. Before I go on, if my story moves you, if you've ever questioned what love is supposed to feel like, please subscribe, like, and share this video. You never know who might need to hear it today. That morning, the light poured through the kitchen window in long golden ribbons, hitting the white tile like it was designed just for beauty. I was standing at the counter in my worn pajama shirt, hands wrapped around a mug of raspberry leaf tea. My fingers were still smudged with colored pencil from a sketch I'd started at dawn, an auburn-haired fairy with delicate wings, reaching toward something unseen. I used to look like her. At least I thought I did, before the swelling, before the doubts, before Liam started pulling away in ways I couldn't name yet. Then I heard the back door creak. I turned, expecting nothing, and there he was, Liam Carter, in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, his hair styled like he had somewhere important to be. He held a bouquet of blush peonies, my favorite. "Happy anniversary," he said, voice warm. "To my favorite artist." I smiled, automatic. "You remembered?" "Of course I did," he said, stepping forward. 5 years, 3 married, and now 2.5 of us. His hand brushed my belly, and I let him touch me, just long enough to feel normal again. We stood like that for a moment, just long enough for me to pretend things hadn't changed. He watched as I placed the flowers in my grandmother's crystal vase. "You always make this place feel like a painting," he murmured. "And you always know what to bring," I replied. But something about his smile didn't sit right. It faded too fast. As I stirred honey into my tea, I felt it again, that small, sharp whisper in my chest that said, "Pay attention." And I wish I had, because by nightfall, everything would start to fall apart. The exam room was cold, the kind that seeps into your skin no matter how many layers you wear. I lay on the crinkly paper, one hand resting on the slight curve of my belly, the other gripping the edge of the table. Liam sat beside me, unusually quiet, his phone for once tucked away in his coat pocket. Maybe that's what made me hopeful, that he'd put it away for this. The technician smiled as she adjusted the wand and pressed it gently against my stomach. The screen flickered with static. I held my breath. "Let's take a look here," she said casually, but her expression shifted after just a few seconds, her brows arched in surprise. I tensed. "Is something wrong?" She didn't answer right away. Then a soft laugh escaped her. "Oh, not at all. In fact, congratulations. You're having twins." My heart skipped. "Wait, twins?" She turned the monitor so we could see it clearly. 2 strong heartbeats. 2 little ones. I blinked fast. My vision blurred with tears. "Twins," I whispered again, this time with a laugh. I reached for Liam's hand, craving his joy. He gave a short, breathy laugh. Wow, that's great." But his smile didn't touch his eyes. His hand stayed in mine, but it had gone cold. On the ride home, I kept glancing down at the sonogram printout in my lap. 2 tiny forms floating like stars in a dark sky. "We'll need 2 cribs," I said, trying to break the quiet. "And we might have to turn your office into a nursery." Liam didn't respond. His jaw was tight, his fingers gripping the wheel too hard. Eventually, he muttered, "We'll figure it out." But he didn't sound like he believed it. At a red light, he braked too suddenly. My hand flew over my stomach. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Wasn't paying attention." No, he wasn't. Not to me, not to them. That evening, I sat alone in the corner of my studio, staring at the fairy I'd been sketching that morning. I gave her 2 wings instead of 1, 2 little hands reaching upward. And for the first time since our wedding, I realized I didn't know what Liam was really thinking. And that scared me more than anything. The sonogram photo lay in my lap like a secret I didn't know how to protect. 2 little silhouettes suspended in a sea of shadows. Tiny, unfinished, perfect. I traced their outlines with my fingertip, hoping Liam might glance over and smile. but his eyes stayed glued to the road, his jaw tense, shoulders hunched like he was bracing for impact. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. I shifted in my seat, trying to sound light. "We'll need double everything now. Diapers, bottles, sleepless nights." Still silence. "And we should probably convert your office," I added, "unless we want to stack 2 cribs in the laundry room." His knuckles whitened against the steering wheel. "We'll figure it out," he said, barely above a whisper. The words were there, but the heart wasn't. I looked over at him, really looked. The man beside me felt like a stranger wearing Liam's face. His lips were pressed tight, the vein in his neck more pronounced than usual. He was thinking something he wasn't saying, and that was worse than any argument we'd ever had. "We always said we wanted a big family," I reminded him gently. "That was before," he said, too quickly. Then he caught himself. "I mean, before we knew it'd happen all at once." At a stoplight, he hit the brakes hard. My hand flew instinctively over my belly. He didn't even look at me. "Sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't mean—" But he didn't finish. I turned toward the window, watching Brooklyn blur past, the mural-covered buildings, the trees turning gold. We used to dream in this car. Road trips to nowhere, playlists blaring, laughing over spilled coffee. Now there was only silence and static. Back at the apartment, Liam helped me out but didn't touch my belly. He kissed the top of my head like it was routine and disappeared into his office before I could ask what he was thinking. And maybe that was the answer. I was carrying our future, and he was walking away from it, 1 quiet mile at a time. I sat curled in the corner of my art studio, knees pulled to my chest, a half-finished sketchbook balanced on my lap. The room smelled faintly of graphite, paper, and the lavender oil I'd been using to help with nausea, though lately none of it helped. The morning light spilled across the floorboards, warm and golden, but it did nothing to ease the knot in my chest. The pencil trembled in my hand as I tried to finish the illustration that had been due last Friday. A children's book commission, a fairy climbing a tree made of painted dreams. But every time I brought the pencil to the page, my fingers faltered. I stared at the wings I'd drawn earlier, unsure whether they belonged to her or to me. Once they symbolized freedom, magic, hope. Now, I didn't know what they meant. Liam hadn't come out of his office since breakfast. Not even a glance. Not even a question about how I was feeling. After the ultrasound, I thought we might spend the day talking names, making lists, maybe even arguing over which stroller was worth the splurge. But nothing. He disappeared into silence, and I was left alone with shadows and pencil lines. I picked up my phone, hovered over his contact. I almost texted him, "Are you okay?" But I stopped myself. Because shouldn't he be asking me that? I put the phone down. The fairy on the page stared back at me, one hand outstretched as if reaching for something just out of frame. Maybe I was doing the same, grasping at a version of us that didn't exist anymore. The studio, once my sanctuary, felt like it was closing in. Then I heard the front door open and close. Liam's footsteps, brief, indifferent, no words. Just the sound of him leaving again, this time without telling me where he was going. I sat frozen for a moment, then slowly I turned to a blank page, and without thinking, I drew 2 tiny hearts side by side. Not for him, for them. Because if he wasn't going to show up for this family, I would, even if it meant doing it with shaking hands and silent tears. That night, our apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old floorboards settling. I lay in bed alone, tucked beneath the worn navy blanket we picked out together during our 2nd year of marriage, the one he once said made the room feel like home. Liam was in the living room, scrolling on his phone, the pale blue light flashing across his face like it belonged to someone I used to know. He hadn't said much since dinner, not even when I asked if he wanted to feel the babies move. He just nodded distractedly and mumbled something about checking work emails. I turned on my side, pressing one hand to the curve of my belly. And then I felt it. A soft flutter, faint but unmistakable, like a whisper from beneath my skin. Then again, gentle, rhythmic, like 2 tiny waves brushing the shore of me. My breath caught. Liam, I said, voice low but urgent. They're moving. He didn't respond. I waited, half hoping he'd hear the shift in my tone, the miracle unfolding inside me. But all I heard was the soft tap of his thumb against the screen. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and turned away, my back to the door, to him. The tears didn't fall, yet. Instead, I let the silence wrap around me like a too-tight blanket. The twins kept moving, unaware of the distance between their parents. Their kicks were timid, like they were testing the world one heartbeat at a time. I whispered into the dark, "I'm here. I feel you." No one else did. Later, when Liam finally came to bed, he didn't say a word. He didn't ask what it felt like or if I was okay. He just lay down and turned away, phone still in hand, scrolling. And I realized there's a certain kind of loneliness that only grows louder when someone's lying right beside you. So I held my belly tighter and listened to my sons instead. Because even if Liam was slipping away, they were still here, alive, real, reaching for me in ways he no longer did. It started with something small, so small I almost let it go. He forgot my prenatal vitamins. Not once, but twice. The first time he said he was running late to a meeting. The second, he simply shrugged. Didn't get a chance to stop. I'll grab them tomorrow. But tomorrow came, and so did the excuse. I stood in the kitchen holding the empty bottle, fingers trembling just slightly. "Liam, I need these. The twins need these." He didn't even look up from his laptop. "I said I'd get them." "You also said that yesterday." That made him glance over, irritation flickering in his eyes. "Tessa, I've had a long day. Can we not do this right now?" There it was. That edge. Not anger exactly, but something colder, dismissive. I backed off. Not because I agreed, but because I was tired. Tired of chasing him through silence. Tired of pretending this version of us was normal. He was working longer hours now. Always late. Always calls with the West Coast team. I stopped waiting up. I stopped asking questions I didn't want the answers to. What stung most wasn't the distance. It was how little he tried to bridge it. He used to put his hand on my belly every night, whispering things to the babies when he thought I was asleep. Names, silly hopes, dreams about camping trips and birthday pancakes. Now, nothing. One night, I reached for his hand in bed, just a small gesture, skin to skin. But he pulled away under the guise of turning off the lamp. I laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd changed too much. If the swelling, the hormones, the constant fatigue had made me unrecognizable to him. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I was asking for too much. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't about hormones. This was about him. He was already halfway gone, and I was still hoping love would be enough to pull him back. It was a Tuesday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Still in my robe, hair pulled into a lazy bun, I shuffled to the door, heart thudding a little faster than it should have. Maybe it was Liam. Maybe he'd forgotten something, or remembered me. But when I opened the door, it wasn't him. It was Karen Carter, Liam's mother, holding a box from some overpriced bakery in Park Slope and wearing that same tight-lipped smile I'd come to dread. "Morning, Natalie," she said, her tone overly bright. "I was in the neighborhood." She wasn't. I stepped aside wordlessly, letting her in. She moved through our apartment like it still belonged to her son. She placed the box on the kitchen counter without asking and poured herself a cup of tea like it was her kitchen. "You look tired," she said, eyeing my face without subtlety. "Carrying two must be exhausting." I nodded politely, hiding my sigh behind a sip of water. "Where's Liam?" she asked. "He said he'd be home early today," I replied. Her eyes narrowed. "Did he?" The silence that followed pressed in like fog. We sat across from each other at the table. Her fingers tapped lightly on the porcelain cup, steady, controlled, like a metronome counting down something inevitable. Then she went for it. "Have you two discussed the costs? 2 cribs, 2 car seats, formula, diapers, doctor visits. It adds up fast, especially now that you're not working." I blinked, stunned. "We've talked. We're managing." "Are you?" she asked, tilting her head, voice deceptively soft. Because Liam's under pressure. There's a big opportunity coming his way, and with 2 newborns, well, it complicates things. I tried to steady my voice. These are his children. We wanted this. She sipped her tea and gave me a look I'll never forget. Pity, with a dash of quiet accusation. He wanted one. My heart dropped. You're wrong, I whispered. She raised an eyebrow. Did he tell you about the promotion offer last week? I shook my head slowly. Her smile was slight. He didn't want to worry you, but it's a major role. One he may have to turn down. Now. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. And for the first time since the twins kicked, I felt afraid, truly afraid, that I wasn't just losing Liam's attention. I was losing him altogether. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not after what Karen had said. I lay in bed with one hand on my belly and the other clenched around a pillow, replaying the conversation on a loop. He wanted one. He didn't tell you about the promotion. Her voice, as calm and sharp as cut glass, sliced through my chest every time. Liam came home close to midnight, the front door clicking softly shut. I didn't move, just listened to the sound of his keys hitting the bowl and the fridge door opening. A routine, no urgency, no guilt. He walked into the bedroom, loosened his tie, and leaned down to kiss my forehead like he hadn't been avoiding me all week. I've got to be up early, he whispered. Did you get offered the promotion? I asked. That stopped him. He froze for half a second, then slowly straightened. Where did you hear that? I sat up, heart pounding. Your mother told me. She said you've been offered something big, something you might have to turn down because of the twins. His expression flickered, guilt, frustration, then that controlled mask he'd perfected. It wasn't finalized. I didn't want to say anything until it was real. You didn't want to say anything, I repeated, voice flat. Because you didn't want me to be real in that decision. He looked away. I'm carrying your children, Liam, I said. Don't you think I deserve to know when life-altering decisions are being made? I didn't want to add stress, he replied, too quickly. That's not it, I snapped. You didn't tell me because part of you is already planning a life that doesn't include all of this, doesn't include us. He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. I'm just trying to keep it together. No, I said, standing slowly. You're trying to keep you together. The rest of us, we're collateral. He didn't argue. And that, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was already detaching. And I was starting to see it all too clearly. It was 2:17 a.m. when the pain hit. At first I thought it was just another cramp, those dull twinges that came and went as my body stretched to make room. But this one didn't fade. It wrapped around my lower back like a steel band, sharp and unforgiving, stealing my breath. I shifted in bed, trying to ease the pressure. Nothing helped. Within minutes, the pain worsened, radiating around my sides, pulsing through my spine. My legs trembled as I sat up. Liam? I called out, breath catching. His side of the bed was cold, untouched. Panic bloomed in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, blinking through the blur. My fingers shook as I dialed his number. 1 ring. 2. He picked up. His voice was groggy. Yeah? I'm in pain, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Something's wrong. I need to go in. There was a pause. Too long. I'm not home, he said. I'm out of town, on a job site. A job site? At 2 a.m.? Then I heard it. A woman's voice murmuring something unintelligible in the background. Soft, familiar. Liam swore under his breath, muffled the receiver. But I'd already heard enough. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I hung up. Then I called 911. By the time the paramedics arrived, I could barely stand. I held the doorframe with one hand and my belly with the other, teeth clenched against the pain. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and cold metal and faces I didn't recognize. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I whispered to the babies, "Hold on. Please, just hold on." My entire body felt like it was unraveling from the inside out. Every breath was a fight, every second, a countdown. And through it all, I kept hearing her voice. Whoever she was, she had him. But I had them. And I wasn't going to let go. The emergency room lights burned too bright, like I'd stepped onto a stage I never asked to be on. Voices blurred. Cold hands moved fast around me, straps clicking, machines beeping, wires being taped across my chest. Someone kept asking about my due date. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my breath short. 26 weeks, I finally managed. The nurse's eyes flickered. She nodded, but I saw the urgency behind her calm. The pain was worse now. Deep, crushing, like my body was collapsing from the inside. My hands gripped the edges of the gurney, knuckles white as another wave tore through me. Placental abruption, one of the doctors said quietly to another. Possible preterm labor. I turned my head toward the sound, heart thundering. Please, I whispered. Please save them. Someone gripped my wrist, gently, grounding. Hang in there, Mama, she said. We're doing everything we can. Time unraveled. I floated in and out of consciousness, moments bleeding into each other, pain overlapping with fear until I could no longer tell which was which. And then, Natalie, a voice said, close, warm, familiar. I blinked, turned. Dr. Ethan Wallace stood beside me, already in surgical scrubs. His eyes locked onto mine. I'm here, he said, taking my hand like it meant something. You're not alone, okay? I've got you. A sob threatened, but I bit it back. He didn't ask questions. He didn't flinch at the chaos. Your babies are strong, he continued, his voice steady. But baby B is in distress. If things don't stabilize in the next few minutes, we go into surgery. I nodded, barely. Breathe with me, he said. Right here. Just like this. We inhaled together. I focused on his voice, on the cadence of his words instead of the tremor in my spine. They wheeled me toward the OR. The hallway blurred into streaks of fluorescent light. I kept breathing. Not for me, for them. And in that moment, as the doors swung open and the team prepared for the worst, I clung to one truth. I wasn't just fighting to stay alive. I was fighting to become a mother. When I came to, everything was quiet. Not the sterile, heart-pounding kind of hospital quiet, but a stillness that felt almost sacred. The lights were dim. The machines hummed beside me, a soft rhythm that grounded me back into my body. My limbs ached, my throat burned. But I was alive. The first thing I did was reach for my belly. I held my breath. Then, a flutter. They were still with me. Relief flooded through me so fast it made my eyes sting. I didn't even try to stop the tears. Hey, a voice said softly from my right. I turned my head and blinked. He was sitting in the corner chair, hunched forward slightly, elbows on his knees, as if he hadn't moved in hours. Ethan? I croaked. He stood quickly, his expression tender and tired. You scared the hell out of us. I gave a weak smile. That makes two of us. I stayed because... He trailed off, glancing at the floor before meeting my gaze again. I just didn't want you to wake up alone. Something shifted in my chest. This man, my old friend from college who once brought me coffee during midterms and walked me home through snowstorms, was here. Not because he had to. Not because it was convenient, but because he showed up. No one told you I was here? I asked. The nurse mentioned your name on the roster. I almost didn't believe it. And yet, here you are, he smiled. I work in neuro now. Transferred to Mount Sinai last month. Timing's strange, I guess. Strange, but kind, I whispered. He moved closer, but not too close, just enough. Can I do anything? I looked away, voice barely audible. Just stay, for a little while. And he did. No questions, no judgment. Just quiet presence. And in that room filled with machines and shadows, it hit me. Not all goodbyes are loud, and not all beginnings announce themselves. Some arrive on the heels of survival, dressed in scrubs, with hands warm enough to remind you that you're still human, still here, still held. It was just past sunrise when Harper arrived at the hospital, clutching a phone charger and a tote bag full of my things, sweatpants, lotion, my sketch pad. She looked exhausted, mascara smudged under her eyes, curls pulled into a messy knot. "Jesus, Natalie," she said, placing everything on the side table. "You could have warned me before giving me a heart attack." I tried to smile. Didn't exactly plan it. She sat down, then reached for my hand and held it tight. "I went by your place first. Figured I'd grab a few things before heading here." Something in her tone changed, sharpened. I looked at her. "What?" Her jaw flexed. "He was there." The air left my lungs. "Liam?" I whispered. She nodded. "And not alone." I closed my eyes. He was with someone. Brunette. Pretty. Early 30s, maybe? I think her name was Chelsea. I heard him say it. They were close. My body went still. "I didn't just see them," Harper continued. "I heard them. They were talking about legal paperwork." She said, and I quote, "With Natalie stuck in the hospital for a couple more weeks, it gives us time to finish everything without a fight." My throat went dry. "Finish what?" Harper's eyes darkened. "Divorce. Settling accounts. She knew about your condition, Nat. She knew exactly where you were, and they were planning around it." I felt the sting of betrayal rise from my stomach, sharp and bitter. "I confronted them," Harper said, voice tight. "Walked right in. Told him what I thought of both of them." "What did he say?" He acted surprised. Like she was just some colleague. Like I didn't hear them planning to gut you while you were lying in a hospital bed trying to keep his children alive. My chest ached, but not from the pregnancy. This was something else, something cold and final. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling, silent, because in that moment, I knew. My marriage wasn't broken. It was over. The hospital room was still. Outside, the morning sun barely reached through the blinds, casting thin lines of gold across my blanket. Harper had stepped out to get coffee, and for the first time since the ambulance ride, I was truly alone. My phone sat on the bedside table, charging. I stared at it. There were no missed calls, no texts, not from Liam, not since that night, not even after Harper confronted him, not even to ask if I or the babies were okay. The silence was louder than any fight we'd ever had. I reached for the phone, my hand still shaky, opened our message thread. The last message was mine, nearly a week ago. "Let me know if you're coming home tonight." No reply. I hovered my thumb over the keyboard, the screen too bright in the dim room. My heart raced. I didn't know what I wanted. An explanation? A denial? Finally, I typed 4 words. "Is it all true?" I stared at them for a long time. Then I hit send. I expected silence. Instead, a few minutes later, the screen lit up. "Liam Carter is calling." I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" He sounded calm. Too calm. "Natalie, I was going to come talk to you in person. I didn't want you to find out like that." "But I did," I said. He sighed. "I didn't plan it. Chelsea and it just happened." "I never meant for it to—" "You didn't plan to lie to your pregnant wife?" I cut in, my voice tight. "Or to disappear when I was in the hospital trying to keep our children alive?" He said nothing. I kept going. "You want honesty? Then give me this. Are you filing for divorce?" His pause was answer enough. "I've spoken to a lawyer," he admitted. "We're drafting papers." It felt like something inside me cracked. Not shattered, just split. Cold and clean. "You're ending our marriage while I'm still in a hospital bed." "I didn't want it to be like this," he said. "But we both know it's not working." No. What wasn't working was him choosing someone else while I carried our sons. I ended the call. Then I placed the phone back on the table and folded my hands over my belly. They were still fighting. So was I. The knock came just after lunch. I'd barely touched the bland chicken broth on my tray when a nurse peeked in, her expression apologetic. "Your husband's here. He brought someone. Said it's about legal documents?" Legal. My stomach twisted. Harper sat by the window, eyes narrowing instantly. She stood before I could speak. "I'll stay." The door opened, and there he was. Liam walked in like he was stepping into a boardroom, pressed shirt, tailored jacket, not a strand of hair out of place. Behind him followed a man in a charcoal suit holding a sleek leather briefcase. "Hi, Natalie," Liam said casually, as if we were old co-workers meeting for coffee. I didn't respond. "This is Evan Caldwell," he continued, gesturing toward the man. "He's my attorney. We thought it might be best to go over everything now." Now, while I was still hooked to monitors and struggling to stay pregnant, Evan cleared his throat. "We've prepared a preliminary agreement, simple, clean. The condo stays in your name. Liam will provide monthly child support and a one-time settlement to cover expenses for the twins." He said it like he was offering a vacation package. I looked at Harper. She looked ready to throw something. "And this," Evan continued, flipping pages like he was reading a lunch menu, "allows both parties to move forward without further emotional distress." Emotional distress? I almost laughed. When he finished, Liam offered me a pen. I stared at the papers, then I pushed them back. "No." Liam blinked. "What?" "I'm not signing anything," I said, voice calm. "Not while I'm lying here trying to keep our children alive." He looked irritated. "Natalie, dragging this out won't help anyone." "No," I said, sharper now. "You don't get to waltz in here with your lawyer and act like this is just a transaction. I'm not a line item to be cleared off your balance sheet." "You always make things harder than they need to be," he muttered. "And you always run when it gets hard," I fired back, "including from your family." Evan tried to speak, but Harper cut him off. "You both need to leave. Now." Liam hesitated. "We'll revisit this after the twins are born." "Fine," I said. "And bring your best lawyer next time, because I'll have mine." And that was the last thing I said to him that day. Not a threat, a promise. Later that evening, the door creaked open again, this time without a knock. I looked up, expecting a nurse or Harper, but it was Ethan, still in his scrubs, his hair slightly tousled, a sheen of exhaustion on his face. He carried a small, brown-wrapped bundle under one arm, like something fragile. "You look better," he said, stepping in with the kind of calm that didn't ask for permission, but didn't overstay either. "I feel stable," I replied, which is the nicest word I've heard all week. He smiled. "Stable's underrated." He moved closer to the edge of my bed and gently placed the package on the tray table. "What's that?" He hesitated, almost shy. "A peace offering, or maybe a reset button." I unwrapped the paper slowly, revealing a leather-bound sketchbook, its cover soft and worn like something meant to be touched. Beneath it was a brand-new set of charcoal pencils and a tiny watercolor palette. Portable, simple, beautiful. "I thought maybe," he started, then stopped himself. "Well, you looked like you needed a way to breathe." My throat tightened. I hadn't drawn in weeks. Not since the ferry with 2 outstretched hands. Not since I started doubting whether I could still create anything that didn't hurt to feel. "I don't know if I remember how," I whispered. "You will," he said. "You always do." I ran my fingers over the smooth pages, flipping one open, blank, possibility in its purest form. "I never told you," I murmured, "but the last drawing I finished was for a client, right before the twins started kicking. I haven't touched a pencil since." Ethan sat gently in the chair beside me. "Then maybe this isn't about starting again. Maybe it's about continuing with new hands." I looked at my own, calloused, tired, but not broken. He didn't push. He didn't hover. He just sat there, quiet, present, and in the stillness between us, I didn't feel abandoned, or betrayed, or even afraid. I felt seen. That night, for the first time since everything began unraveling, I opened the sketchbook. And I drew. Not for a deadline, not for a client. For me. It started with a cramp. Not the slow, dull kind I'd gotten used to. This one was sharp, precise, like something had unlatched inside me. I had been sketching, 2 tiny hands reaching toward each other, when the pain struck. The pencil slipped from my fingers, the sketchbook tumbling to the floor. Then came the second wave. Hot and cutting, it radiated up my spine and squeezed the air from my lungs. I clutched the side rail of the bed, breath ragged, the room spinning slightly as I tried to focus. I fumbled for the call button, missed, tried again, hit it. Seconds later, a nurse burst through the door. "Natalie?" I couldn't speak, just nodded and pointed to my stomach. My hands trembled. She didn't wait. Within moments, 2 more nurses rushed in. Monitors were wheeled over, wires tangled. The oxygen mask slid over my mouth, its hiss cold and steady. "Significant contractions," one nurse said. "Let's prep the OR." "No, please," I tried to say, but the words came out fractured. "Breathe, Natalie," someone said beside me. "We've got you." I tried. In, out, in, out. But the fear kept rising, thick, tidal, crashing through my chest. I thought of the nursery that wasn't ready, of the names we hadn't chosen, of Liam. Not here. He'd made his choice. I was alone. Then, through the chaos, I heard a voice cut through. "I'm here. Natalie, I'm right here." Ethan. He stepped into my field of vision, face calm but focused, already in scrubs. He took my hand and squeezed. "You're safe. But the babies need you to stay calm. You hear me?" I nodded weakly. "Breathe with me," he said, voice close to my ear. "Just like last time." We inhaled together. The lights above became streaks as they wheeled me down the hall. I heard someone call out, "Baby B's heart rate dropping." Ethan didn't flinch. "Stay with me, Natalie." And I did. Not for me. For them. Because whatever was happening to my body, whatever storm it was caught in, I couldn't let go. Not yet. The lights overhead blurred into smears of white and silver as I was rushed through the hallway toward the OR. The voices around me blended into static, doctors barking instructions, nurses calling out vitals, a monitor's high-pitched warning that something inside me wasn't holding on. "Baby B is in distress," someone said, and that was the moment I broke. My body trembled violently. I couldn't see clearly, couldn't think past the fear pounding in my chest. The twins. I was going to lose them. I could feel it. "Natalie," a voice came through, low and steady. "Look at me." It cut through the noise like a thread through fabric. I turned my head. Ethan was beside me in the rolling chaos, his gloved hand gripping mine. His eyes, focused, calm, grounded, were the only thing tethering me to earth. "You're doing great," he said, lowering his face close to mine. "You're breathing. You're here. And we're not going to let go unless we have to, okay?" Tears slid down my cheeks, but I nodded. "I need you to stay with me," he continued, his tone more gentle than clinical. "If we can stabilize, we might not have to deliver tonight, but you have to breathe with me. Just you and me right now, nothing else." He inhaled deeply. I followed, unsteady at first, but I followed. My fingers dug into his gloved hand like it was the last solid thing in a world collapsing. "I'm scared," I whispered. "I know," he said, "but fear means you're still fighting, and they are too." The gurney halted. Another team surrounded me, adjusting monitors, prepping for surgery, but everything slowed down inside my head, because Ethan's words were louder than the fear. "They're not giving up, and neither are you." I let out a long breath, trying to anchor myself in the rhythm he'd given me. In, out, then came another voice. "Contractions are easing, fetal heart rates improving." Relief swept over the team like a wave, but it hit me like a whisper. Ethan leaned down once more. "You bought them more time. You bought yourself more time." And for the first time in days, I believed I still had some left. I don't remember falling asleep, only that the pain had ebbed into exhaustion and the fear had given way to stillness. When I opened my eyes, the lights were dim again. The room was quiet, save for the gentle hiss of oxygen and the soft beeping of twin heart monitors. My hands were cold, IVs taped to my arms. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was still pregnant. A nurse appeared beside me almost instantly, as if she'd been watching. "You're okay," she said softly, offering a reassuring smile. "You're still carrying." Both babies made it through the night. I blinked at her, the words slow to sink in. "No surgery?" I asked, my voice barely there. She shook her head. "You were close, but your body stabilized in time. They're still inside, Natalie. Holding on." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. Later, as the sun rose pale through the blinds, my mom rushed in, breathless, her sweater half-buttoned and her purse still open. She crossed the room in seconds and cupped my face with trembling hands, like she was trying to convince herself I was real. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "You scared me half to death." "I thought I was losing them," I choked out. "Not on my watch," she said, fierce through tears. "And not on yours either." We sat in silence after that, her hand wrapped around mine, both of us listening to the rhythm of 2 tiny heartbeats on the monitor. Each one felt like a miracle. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned. He didn't knock, just stepped in with quiet purpose, holding another small brown paper package. Inside was a new set of charcoal pencils and a tiny watercolor palette. "The last ones might have been cursed," he said with a tired smile. I laughed through my tears. "You saved them." He shook his head. "No, you did. I just reminded you how." And in that moment, surrounded by love, by life, by steady hands and unspoken grace, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning again. That evening, the hospital room felt heavier than usual, like the walls had absorbed the fear I'd tried so hard to hide. The heart monitors hummed a quiet rhythm, a reminder that my boys were still with me, barely, but beating. I was propped up in bed, sketchbook resting on my lap, though I hadn't drawn a single line since Ethan left. My mind was too full, my body too tired. Then I heard footsteps outside the door, familiar ones, quick and determined. It swung open and my mom appeared. Her coat was half-buttoned, her lipstick smudged like she'd applied it in a moving car. The moment our eyes met, she crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her arms around me, her purse dropping to the floor with a thud. "Oh, honey," she whispered, cradling my face in her palms like I was 6 again and had scraped both knees. "You scared me. You really scared me." "I scared myself," I admitted, my voice cracking. I thought I lost them." She pulled back just enough to look at me. "You didn't. You held on." And so did they. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I let myself collapse into someone. Her arms were small, but they held all the strength I didn't know I needed. She rubbed slow circles on my back, humming softly, something wordless and warm, the way she used to when I was sick as a little girl. "I should have come sooner," she murmured. "I just didn't realize how bad it had gotten with Liam." "You were always so good at pretending everything was fine." I swallowed hard. "Because I wanted it to be. I really did." "I know." Her voice gentled. "But pretending isn't the same as peace." We stayed like that for a long while, her hand over mine, our breaths syncing, the monitors keeping quiet time. 2 tiny heartbeats, still here. So was I. So was she. And for the first time in a long, broken season, I didn't feel like I had to hold it all together alone. My mother's arms were enough. Her presence said what words never could. "You're safe now. Let yourself breathe." The next morning, the sky outside my hospital window was a soft gray, the kind of muted light that made everything feel quieter, more tender. My mom had just stepped out to grab breakfast downstairs, promising to bring back something that didn't come with a hospital logo. I sat upright, sketchbook resting on my legs. My fingers hovered over the page, tracing invisible lines. My boys were still hanging on. So was I. But the silence between pulses felt heavier now, not painful, just reflective. A soft knock. Ethan poked his head in. "Bad time?" I shook my head. "Come in." He walked in holding a paper bag and a to-go cup. "I brought contraband," black coffee and a blueberry muffin from the bakery across the street, still warm. I blinked. "You seriously brought me muffins?" He gave a small shrug. "You've had a hard week, and you hate hospital food." That simple sentence nearly undid me. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was just true. And it meant he'd been paying attention, really paying attention. He set the bag on the tray table, then pulled the chair close but didn't sit. "How are you feeling today?" I took a breath. "Tired, but steady." He nodded, then finally sat down. "That's a good place to be." We were quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" Ethan looked at me like the answer should have been obvious. "Because you don't deserve to go through this alone." I looked down at my lap. I'm starting to forget what being cared for without conditions feels like. "Then let this remind you," he said, his voice steady. "No expectations, no hidden motives, just care." The lump in my throat swelled again, but I kept it at bay. "Thank you for being here." He reached out gently, placing one hand over mine. "You've always been strong, Natalie, but even strong people deserve a hand to hold." That one sentence, so simple, so honest, wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. Because sometimes the kindest thing someone can do isn't fix what's broken. It's sitting with you in the quiet while you find your way back. It was late afternoon when he appeared, almost as if he'd been rehearsing the timing. The hospital room had quieted, with the soft beeping of monitors blending into the hum of the building's tired air. I was alone. Mom had stepped out to take a call, and Ethan had promised to bring the twins some clean clothes from home. The knock at the door startled me. I turned, and there he was, Ryan, holding a plastic grocery bag in one hand, a bouquet of slightly wilted daisies in the other. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, or maybe like one who had finally seen himself clearly and didn't like what he saw. "Hey," he said, voice hoarse. I didn't speak. He stepped in anyway, closing the door behind him with an awkward gentleness. He didn't move closer, just stood there, fiddling with the plastic bag. "I didn't know if you'd even want to see me." "I didn't," I said flatly. "But here you are." He swallowed hard, the way people do when they're trying to push back the shame rising in their throat. "Natalie, I messed up. I was scared. I acted like a coward. No, I was a coward. You didn't deserve that." I looked out the window instead of at him. "You walked away when things got hard, when I needed you most." "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm not here to ask for anything. I needed to say I'm sorry, really sorry." I finally turned to face him. "Sorry doesn't take away the weeks I spent wondering why I wasn't enough. It doesn't erase the nights I held my belly praying the stress wouldn't hurt the babies." He nodded, pain flashing across his face. "I know it doesn't, but you deserve the truth. What I did had nothing to do with you. It was me, running from a life I wasn't brave enough to live." A long silence fell between us. Then I said, "I don't hate you, Ryan. I just don't trust you anymore." He exhaled. "That's fair." I didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask for a second chance. But for the first time in months, there was something honest between us. And sometimes, even a late apology can open a door, not to reconciliation, but to release. It started with a blank page, literally. Ethan brought me a sketch pad and a set of watercolor pencils the day I was finally cleared to sit upright in bed without monitors beeping in protest. He didn't say much, just set them on my lap and kissed my forehead gently. "I thought your hands might be ready before your heart is," he whispered. At first, I stared at the paper like it was mocking me. The clean white surface felt too open, too vulnerable, just like I did. But later that night, when the hospital wing had gone quiet and my babies were asleep in the nursery, I picked up the pencil, and I drew. Not anything fancy, just lines, loose curves. Then I let the colors bleed into them. Warm ochres, soft blues, tiny strokes of crimson at the edges. I didn't even know what I was drawing at first, but as the image formed, two tiny hands cradled by larger ones, with a sun rising in the background, I felt something inside me click into place. this wasn't just a picture. It was a beginning. The next day, Harper wheeled her chair next to my bed. Her face was pale, thinner, but her eyes were sharper than I'd seen in months. She glanced down at my sketch and smiled. "That's beautiful," she said softly. I nodded. "It's the first time I've drawn since the diagnosis." Harper was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and touched the edge of the paper. "You know, maybe what we go through doesn't ruin us. Maybe it rewrites us. Different lines, different colors, same soul." I looked at her and saw not just my daughter, but a survivor, a mirror. "I want to fill this book," I told her. "Page by page, no pressure to be perfect, just honest." Harper smiled. "Then save me a page. I think I've got something to say too." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was chasing after the life I lost. I was drawing the one I had. The email came on a Thursday morning, just as I was wiping oatmeal off my shirt after feeding the twins. The subject line read, "Call for Artists, Women Reclaiming Light." I almost deleted it. But something stopped me. As the babies cooed in their high chairs, I clicked open the message with a tired thumb. It was an open call for a juried exhibition at a local gallery, pieces centered around themes of rebirth, survival, and transformation. At first, I laughed. Me? Submit my art? It had been years since I dared to think of myself that way. I was still sketching on hospital pads and painting between feeding sessions. My studio just a tray table in the living room. And yet, I couldn't ignore the ache in my fingers, that old pulse of purpose. Later that evening, after the twins had finally drifted to sleep, I brought it up to Ethan. He was washing bottles at the sink, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "You think I'm crazy if I applied?" I asked, voice low. He turned to me, brow furrowed. "Crazy?" He stepped closer. "Claire, I've seen what you've been painting. You don't just draw. You tell people things with your work, things they forgot they needed to hear." I stared at him, the vulnerability of it all curling in my chest. "But what if they don't pick me?" Ethan smiled gently, brushing a speck of paint off my cheek. "Then they'll miss out. But you won't, because you showed up." That night, I stayed up until nearly 2 a.m., choosing pieces, photographing them, writing a short artist statement that made my fingers tremble. I wrote about survival, motherhood, betrayal, and rediscovery. I didn't tell anyone after I hit submit. It wasn't about the gallery anymore. It was about claiming something that had always been mine. My voice, my vision, my right to create beauty from the broken. I wasn't expecting anything that morning. I had just wiped applesauce off Sophie's chin and was wrestling a sock onto Lucas's squirming foot when my phone buzzed with a new email. I read the subject line once, then again. "Congratulations, you've been selected for exhibition." Everything around me blurred. The twins' chatter faded. My heart hammered in my chest like it used to before I walked into a courtroom. Except this was more terrifying and more exhilarating. I reread the email, word for word. "We're pleased to inform you that your submission, Mother in Fragments, has been selected for inclusion in the upcoming show, Women Reclaiming Light. Your work was chosen from over 700 submissions." 700. My throat tightened. I sank slowly to the kitchen floor, back pressed against the cabinet. Sophie toddled over and placed her plush bunny on my lap like it might help. It did. I called Ethan. When he answered, I could barely get the words out. "They picked me," I whispered, voice trembling. "They actually picked me." There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a smile I could hear through the phone. "Claire, that's incredible. I never doubted they would." "But I did," I said softly. "I know," he replied, "but you still submitted it. That's what matters." Later that evening, when the kids were asleep and the house was finally still, I sat with the official invitation in my hand. It was elegant, cream cardstock with delicate lettering, my name printed under the title of my piece. The gallery wanted me there for opening night. I traced my name with my finger, breath caught in my chest. I wasn't just someone who used to paint. I was an artist, again. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I gave it to myself. Some days still felt heavy. I'd wake up to the sound of Lucas crying or Sophie's tiny cough echoing through the baby monitor, and for a moment, I'd forget who I was outside of them. But something had shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was in the way I started humming again while brushing Sophie's hair, the way I'd open the curtains just a little wider, letting light fall across my sketchpad on the kitchen table. I was still tired, sure, but I was no longer drowning. One afternoon, after dropping the twins off at Ethan's for the weekend, I parked by the lake near the old bridge. It had been years since I'd been there. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and the only sound was the wind pressing softly against the leaves. I sat on a bench facing the water and pulled out a worn notebook. I hadn't written in it since the pregnancy. The first few pages were full of fear, medical terms, reminders to breathe. Now I turned to a fresh page. I didn't plan what to write. I just let it spill. Today I felt okay, not amazing, but okay, and maybe that's enough. I paused, then added, peace doesn't roar. It arrives on tiptoe when you're not bracing for impact anymore. The tears came quietly, not from sadness, but from relief. I had spent so long holding myself together for everyone else, Ethan, the babies, even my mother. But out here, in this moment, I let go. And I didn't fall apart. When I returned home that evening, the silence didn't feel empty, it felt earned. I lit a candle, made myself tea, and pulled my blanket tighter around my shoulders. I was still healing, still learning. But for the first time in a long while, I believed in the possibility of joy, of mornings that weren't shadowed by what had been lost, but touched by what could still be found. It was a Saturday morning like any other, sunlight spilling through the sheer kitchen curtains, the smell of cinnamon toast lingering in the air. I had just put Sophie down for her nap when I passed by the living room window, mug of tea in hand, and there she was, standing across the street by the edge of the park where the maple trees curved into an arch, was my mother. Same coat, same posture. Her gaze wasn't hurried or nervous. She was just watching. My breath caught. For a second, I thought it was a ghost of some memory I hadn't made peace with. But she shifted her feet, raised a hand, half wave, unsure. Real. I stepped back from the window instinctively, heart thudding against my chest like it didn't know whether to leap or recoil. It had been nearly a year since we'd spoken face to face. After the hospital. After the silence. After the apology that came too late. I stared at the mug in my hand, at the swirl of steam rising like a question I couldn't answer. A soft knock at the door broke the moment. I didn't move, not right away. Instead, I turned back to the window. She hadn't crossed the street. She was still standing there, eyes fixed on the window like she was hoping I'd appear again, hoping I'd see her, acknowledge her. Forgive her? I thought of all the things I had rehearsed, words sharp with pain, cold with clarity. But now, none of them came. Only a question echoed in my mind. Was I ready? Sophie stirred in the monitor, the sound pulling me back to myself. I exhaled slowly. I walked to the front door and unlocked it, but didn't open it. Not yet. Then, I pulled back the curtain once more and met her eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't look away. I hadn't planned on meeting anyone. Not with my heart still bruised, my hands full with Sophie, and my trust buried somewhere under layers of old hurt. But life doesn't ask if you're ready. It just shows up. It started with a painting class I reluctantly joined at the community center. Something to break the quiet. Something just for me. He was the instructor's friend, covering for a day. Mark, mid-30s, warm eyes, paint smudged on his wrist like it belonged there. He didn't try to impress, he just noticed things. "That blue you're using, it's gentler than last week," he said once, leaning over my shoulder. I didn't realize anyone had been paying that close attention. I found myself talking more. About art, about grief, about how Sophie now pronounced banana like it was an exotic destination. Mark listened the way no one had in years. Not with judgment, not even with sympathy. Just presence. One evening, class ended late. I lingered, packing slowly, hoping he might stay. He did. You seem lighter these days, he said quietly. I looked down at my hands. I'm trying to let myself feel again, not just survive. Mark smiled, then paused. Would you ever want to get coffee sometime? Just you and me, no paintbrushes. I froze for a heartbeat. My first instinct was to retreat, to say I was busy, overwhelmed, not ready. But then I remembered how Sophie had laughed that morning when I danced with her in the kitchen, how I'd felt joy, not borrowed or forced, but mine. I think I'd like that, I said. My voice surprised even me. It wasn't a grand moment. No sweeping music, no cinematic lighting, just two people standing beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, trying. But in that quiet, awkward yes, something inside me shifted. Maybe healing doesn't always look like closure. Sometimes it looks like a beginning. The gallery smelled like fresh paint and nervous hope. I stood in the middle of the white-walled space, my canvases surrounding me like pieces of a life I had fought hard to rebuild. Each brushstroke carried fragments of who I had been. Mother, survivor, woman reclaiming her voice. Some paintings were raw and jagged, others quiet, full of light. Together, they told a story I hadn't planned to share, but somehow needed to. The crowd began to gather. Neighbors, artists, even the nurse from Sophie's clinic who had once held my hand during the ultrasound. And Mark, standing tall at the back, catching my eye with the same grounded warmth that had slowly unraveled my walls. A woman stopped in front of one canvas, an abstract swirl of blues and ochres titled Breathe. She looked at it for a long time before whispering, "It feels like coming up for air." I swallowed a lump in my throat. That piece had come from a night I thought I'd never make it to morning. Her words were more than praise, they were connection. Proof that pain, when transformed, could speak a language deeper than words. Later, when the crowd thinned, Mark stepped beside me. "You did it," he said simply. I nodded, but my heart was full. I didn't think I ever would. "You didn't just paint pictures, Claire. You painted your way back to life." He was right. This wasn't just an exhibit. It was a resurrection. The silent grief, the late-night panic attacks, the tiny victories of Sophie smiling at breakfast, they were all here, on canvas, not as scars, but as light filtered through broken glass. As I watched people walk slowly past the paintings, lingering, feeling, I realized something. I no longer needed anyone's permission to exist fully. This was my art, my story, my rebirth. Sophie had fallen asleep in the car, one hand clutching her stuffed polar bear, her soft breathing syncing with the quiet hum of the engine. I didn't want to wake her just yet. Instead, I parked in front of the house and let myself look at the woman in the rearview mirror. Same face, same eyes, but everything else felt different, stronger. It hit me quietly, like a wave you don't see coming. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living, with intention, with boundaries, with a fire that had once been reduced to embers, and somehow I'd kept going, through betrayal, heartbreak, motherhood, fear. I kept going. The front door opened, and my mom stepped out, squinting into the late afternoon light. She had come to visit for Sophie's art showcase at school, and surprisingly, she stayed for dinner the night before without picking a single fight. We hadn't talked much about the past, not yet, but something in her tone had softened, like she saw me now not as the daughter she wanted, but as the woman I'd become. As I got Sophie out of the car, she stirred and mumbled, "Mommy, did I miss the sunset?" I smiled, brushing the hair from her forehead. "Not yet, baby. It's just starting." We walked into the house together, the air warm with roasted vegetables and quiet music. Mark was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, humming along to Otis Redding like he'd always belonged. I set Sophie on the couch and turned toward the hallway mirror. For a second, I paused. "You are a strong woman, Claire," I whispered to myself. Not to believe it, but to remind myself I no longer needed anyone else to say it for me. Because I had faced storms and stitched myself back together, not into the same shape, but something new, someone whole, and that was power. The gallery was quiet now. The last guests had left, their footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Only the soft rustle of fabric and the occasional clink of glass remained. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by paintings that weren't just art. They were pieces of me, of my grief, my survival, my rebirth. Sophie had fallen asleep in the corner of the lounge with a sketch pad still in her lap, little stars and horses scattered across the page. Mark was speaking with a journalist near the entrance, his voice low and proud. And my mother, she'd surprised me the most. She came early, stayed through the entire exhibit, and even pulled me into a quiet hug near the window where my largest canvas hung. No words, just the kind of silence that means something's finally been understood. I walked over to the final painting. It was called Becoming, a silhouette of a woman standing in the middle of a storm, arms outstretched, not to fight it, but to feel it. The kind of storm you survive by letting it shape you, not break you. Claire, Mark's voice behind me was warm. They loved your work. You ready to celebrate? I turned to him, smiling, tears brimming at the edges but not falling. Not this time. I already am. Because celebration, I've learned, isn't about champagne or applause. It's about peace, the kind that grows quiet and steady inside you when you stop chasing someone else's version of love and start building your own. I tucked Sophie's sketchpad into my bag, kissed her forehead, and turned off the gallery lights. We stepped outside into the crisp night air. The city buzzed around us, alive with possibility, and for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't afraid of what came next. This journey didn't begin when I left. It began the moment I stopped asking for permission to be whole. I've learned that healing isn't linear. That love, real love, doesn't make you smaller to keep peace. It stretches with you, grows with you. And the most powerful thing you can ever do is begin again. If Claire's story touched your heart, take a second to tap like, subscribe, share with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below, because maybe your beginning starts today too.